2012, one thing I was not going to be able to do in the 3 years I had was fix the whole of London's telecommunications infrastructure. No, that wasn't going to work. So what we had to do was really two things. The first thing we did, and this was the first time it's happened in the UK, I don't know whether it's ever happened overseas, we got all of the mobile networking companies, so I'm talking about the likes of Telefonica and Vodafone and so on, to work together to provide shared infrastructure in the Olympic Park and off park. And in fact we had 17 additional macro cells in the park and 18 off park at their cost. And how did I manage to do that? Well, I did that basically by explaining to them the consequences on their brand, and mine, on their brand of not being able to provide a decent service during the Olympics. But yeah, you can imagine that was a hairy negotiation. The other thing we did was working with BT. We got the planet's largest high-density Wi-Fi system put in across the park. And actually anyone who was there will tell you that you could actually stream video live in the stadium while sport was going on. You could get the feed from another event at the same time as you were sat there, and that worked well. So we got ourselves out of that particular problem. But the problem is, and this is a bit of an Olympic problem, the level of service we now set in London, which I largely managed to do at somebody else's cost, is now, of course, the baseline level expectation for the next lot, namely Rio. Because their problem they're going to have is they're not going to find it as easy as I did to get somebody else to pay for it. And that's kind of one of the Olympic problems, really. Each time there's an edition of the Games, the bar gets raised, and it gets a little bit harder, and a little bit more expensive for the next lot that come along. Let me finish on this one. So, before the Games, everybody told us that we were going to get hammered by any amount of potential cyber terrorists, hacktivists, state attack, all the rest of it. And indeed, anyone watching the press would have seen the anonymous attacks that happened in early 2012. A number of UK government sites got attacked and got hit and got brought down, largely by distributed denial of service attacks. Is everyone with me? And so we kind of knew that this was going to be one of the areas. And actually it's quite interesting. We did have a bunch of hacktivist attacks, and in fact they were quite helpful to us. They would do things like, this is one of them, there were several. They would actually advertise what they were planning to do with posters like this on the internet. You know, pity they didn't use the Olympic rings properly. And then they would Twitter out to their communities, you know, when they proposed to attack. So, you know, 5 o'clock Thursday night, let's have a pop at the Olympics. It was very helpful from our point of view because we generally were monitoring all social media. We saw this stuff coming. So they weren't really, the hacktivist groups, too much of a challenge because it was just really a collection of amateurs all trying to put more load on our website than we could handle. It was never actually, I can say this now, it was never actually going to be a problem because the way we constructed our website was very much on a content distributed basis. So is everyone with me? People heard of a firm called Akamai? Mm-hmm. Okay, basically what Akamai does, it allows you to edge distribute your content to the servers in the countries or regions where your people are. So that if you've got a user in the United States, user in say New York City, he connects into a server that's probably in New York City as well. The first person in New York City to pull a page brings it local, and then everybody else in that part of the world uses the local copy, not the London copy. Okay, that's what a content distribution network does for you. We worked with a firm called Akamai to do that for us. So actually, from a distributed denial of service point of view, that makes it quite a hard site to attack, because actually you're as distributed as the people trying to attack you. So we were pretty confident that actually these kind of attacks weren't going to be a problem for us. And as it proved, we were pretty right to be confident. Now people sometimes ask me, well, how many cyber attacks did you suffer? And of course, the answer is, I don't know, and nobody knows. Because there's constant, anybody who knows this world knows that there's constant attacks and probes and attempts made on any high-profile website all of the time. But during the period of the Games, there were 6 significant attacks whereby you know, I had to get involved in one way or another. None of them did us any harm, ultimately, but they are just worth a little bit of description. So the first one was this. On the 26th of July, that was the day before the opening ceremony. And it came from somewhere not actually too far from here, a little east of here. It was a probing attack by a fairly well-known network of hackers who like to make a name for themselves by publishing vulnerabilities in high-profile websites, essentially. So there was a lot of little probing and testing going on. Happily, they decided they couldn't get anywhere, and they never published anything, which was just fine. But that kind of warmed us up. Got a bit more exciting on the evening of the opening ceremony. And there were really two things that happened on the evening of the opening ceremony, which caused me no little stress. The first thing, this is public domain, so I'm not telling you anything that isn't already out there in the newspapers. The first thing that happened was we got a phone call from government to say that they'd arrested somebody who claimed that they could hack into the power systems on the park and take all the power down in time to basically disrupt the opening ceremony. Okay. Lots of people, as you can imagine the tension at senior level in the UK on the evening of the opening ceremony. And it was pretty clear that actually it was not a particularly credible threat. And we had lots of backup generators, as you can imagine, in the park. So we were reasonably relaxed about it. I didn't stop quite a lot of my day on the 27th being taken that would explain to people what could not happen. And then, at 5 o'clock, we got our first proper cyber attack. Now, this cyber attack came from over 90 IP addresses around the world, okay, and it was completely timed and coordinated. So, probably a botnet attack, certainly automated, couldn't have been people, it was far too synchronized. Went on for about 40 minutes, very high volume of packets, classic DDoS. Didn't really affect us. It was caught at the edge. I've already explained to you about Akamai and so on. But it was an interesting experience. And actually, this lot never attacked again, as far as we can tell. But we think they went off onto some other fairly high-profile sites. The next day, on the 3rd, is when we started picking up the hacktivist type activity, a post of which I've shown you one, and there were several others. And that kind of went on for the rest of the games. But I just put it up there for reference. This was quite interesting. Number 4. So, one of the services we provided to press agencies was kind of open access to the internet, dedicated internet access for them, so they could do whatever they wanted to do, contact their home office, all the rest of it. And of course, this was a bring your own device kind of construct. Most of the press agencies set up their own offices with their own technology on our sites using this internet access service. And one of the press agencies, who will remain nameless, clearly hadn't got much of a, what's the right word, much of a process themselves about IT security. They had a bunch of malware on their equipment, which pretty quickly, on the 4th, we were getting calls from people saying, why are you attacking other people, Jerry? Huh? What? And it turned out that we had a bunch of malware on one of our clients' PCs, and it was all very difficult because you have to try and tell them in the nicest possible way that they need to get their act together. And they weren't happy about it because it was embarrassing for them. And it had a sequel, which came along here. Those IP addresses were obviously clocked by somebody. And on the 3rd of August here, a very major DDoS attack happened on our IP address that we'd hired to these press agencies. 300,000 packets a second attack, which happily, again, we were sufficiently resilient to cope with. But it was clearly somebody somewhere had clocked this as an address to attack. And then we had a final little wave of DDoS attacks on the 6th here, and then on the last one there. And then that was really it for cyber. There was lots of low-level attacks thereafter through the powers, but it kind of went away. But hopefully that gives you the actual truth behind the cyber situation on the games. Okay. Finally, the last challenge. The last of the ones I've chosen to mention anyway. Operating the games is a little different than your normal operation. So your normal service management operation in a company would offer a service that goes a little bit like this. If you've got a problem, ring this number, some help desk number. You ring the number, you get a reference number. You know, on a good day, somebody comes out and helps you fairly quickly. On a bad day, it might take a little longer. On an even worse day, they might have to send off for a spare part before you get service. That's your normal corporate IT service level. Now, if you're a commentator on the edge of the field of play and there's a live event going on, this is a process that's basically not going to work for you. So you have to approach service management with a very different mindset. And what you have to do, in fact, is, and saturate is the right word, is saturate your venues with as many spare parts as you can get your hands on and as many people as you can afford. And that's people from your supplier base, but it's also volunteers. So I mentioned the volunteers that run around with bits of paper. We had another bunch of volunteers who did the technical support here and basically provided that frontline support. So if and this happened, a commentator information system terminal went down in front of the commentator, we would always be able to just do a quick box swap and have given them a replacement quickly. So that starts to drive your volumes. And while I'm on the volunteers, I should mention one other thing the volunteer did for me. They would actually capture information that went into the results network that wasn't part of the official result, but was relevant to the journalist reporting. So, for example, if we take a field hockey competition, for example, the one where Holland beat Argentina 2-0 in the women's final, they would capture how often, somebody had a crack at corner or committed a foul, and that would all go into that same results network. So these were volunteers, sports nuts, basically, with great keyboard skills, but working within my volunteer task force. And I hope you noticed the neat way I brought in the last Dutch goal into that little story. Anyway, back to operations. So as well as all this stuff in the venues, we had a technology operations centre. This is a picture of it, and you'll see a little bit more in the video in a moment, which was a 24/7 operation where we had, does the term level 3 support mean anything to you? Basically the expert support from all our suppliers and some of our partners like Ofcom, who are the national regulator for telecoms in the UK, who are worried about frequency management, all in there on a 24/7 basis. So even though we hoped we wouldn't use their skills very often, they were always there, locked in a room, effectively, during the period of the games. Again, a very different model from normal corporate, where typically those people would be on call, and it would take some time to bring them in from wherever to deal with a real live problem. If you're running a bank or something, that's how you do it. But no, we had 197 positions in the Technology Operations Centre, staffed 24/7, and quite a busy place, it turned out. One more challenge. I said the last one was the last, but here's another. This was the resource profile for just my team. So ignoring my suppliers who work for me and the volunteers, this was the profile of staff take-up, right? So one of the other big challenges with it all is this is March 11 here, this is January 12. You are recruiting people the whole time you go. So as well as training volunteers, you're training new staff. And in fact, I took on a whole bunch of sandwich students, interns, in the last year, 40 of them, to take us through that last year. So actually building the team is kind of one of the challenges that kind of fell to me to worry about a lot. And people coming from lots of different backgrounds, some coming from banking, some coming from public sector, some coming from the sporting world, getting them to work effectively together was something of a challenge and always is in organising committees, but you'll enjoy this part. We ran a whole programme, a social programme really, of trying to group these people together. We ran things called Wet Wednesdays, which consisted of a lot of beer and other activities like that to try and meld this team quickly together. So, that's all I want to say in terms of the presentation. I hope you've got lots of questions. Before I get there, I'm going to play you a little video which is about the technology. And you will unfortunately hear from me briefly in this. But I hope this will bring together some of the threads of what I've been
The Olympics are about passion, they're about dedication, they're about commitment, but they're also about technology.
When you're an athlete, you're just focused on being at the venue, getting in the water or getting on the track, and then going back to bed at the village, eating some food, getting back on the track, getting back in the water. The Technology Operations Centre wouldn't have even touched my radar, except for the fact that we needed the technology to work when our races were on.
Technology is the basis of everything we do in sport. It's about distance, it's about height, it's about speed, it's about time, it's about precision. So making sure that the technology is not just inwardly focused, but outwardly focused to the many millions and millions of people that are going to be watching at home on television that want to make sense of what they're watching, and technology helps them do that.
Timeframes that the team have had to deploy the equipment to the venue, it's gone pretty well from a TOC point of view, but we've got a lot of fine-tuning to do. And also because the marathon test event is not using any of our central info diffusion systems. I see the next series of test events when central systems are coming online as a far more challenging from a central TOC perspective.
Well, the road cycling race is an enormously long course. 140 odd kilometres.
We've got an incredibly complex radio system going today. It's the most complex trunk radio solution that this country's ever delivered, and it's covering an area that has never been covered in this way before.
The most important thing about test events is that you learn, and every test event you get better at, so that by games time it's perfect, because that's what we should be aiming for.
Our main control area was in about an inch of water this morning, so we've had to go out quickly to source a small steel deck staging, rider plinth, which just raises it off the ground about 8 inches, which just kept it out of the water. Obviously there's a lot of electrical equipment in there, not only from a health and safety point of view, but also, you know, water in the wrong cables and things stop working at a critical point.
I think some of the big lessons we've learned from this one are probably sort of how we interface with various other people. Ticketmaster, who are sort of our ticketing provider. This is the first time we've had a test of their system live in a venue. So there's a few teething problems on the first day, which we had to overcome. But that's great because those lessons have gone forward now into the basketball and BMX event, which is taking place next week.
This is the first time officials and the statisticians are using the Amiga technology, and we've got a few issues with the way they're used to doing it and the way they're doing it for games time, and the test event is kind of their opportunity to learn. It's not only testing our software and systems, it's the networks connecting back to our OBR room, connecting back to the TOC.
The BMX event cannot run when it's raining, so when it started raining today, we just put our team on hold. We were in contact with the top regarding a change request. We got the decision, the covers come off and they dry the track.
And they work! The test events are doing what they set out to do, which is to get the teams to understand what putting an event on is all about, as well as proving some of the technology along the way. What we're doing this week is running an exercise called Technical Rehearsal 1. And the purpose of these exercises is to find out how the technology and the organisation respond to things going wrong.
It's 5 minutes before the race is due to start. And I need to tell you that one of the team members in the boat is to be replaced.
I'm hoping that we have lots of fun, but at the same time I'm also hoping that we break quite a few things and quite a few things go wrong, because that's really where we're going to get the learning.
We made a mock website explaining that there was a suspect package and that might trigger some reaction in the TOC. And of course the immediate reaction to that was to aggressively attack a website that was being defaced with incorrect info.
So to some extent that actually played into our hands, because half an hour later...
I would like to ask you to evacuate this floor so we know a little bit more about the situation. Thank you.
As far as I'm aware, it's actually the first time the TOC has ever been evacuated.
We were able to get out, we were able to do the head counts, we knew that all the staff was safe, which was the most important thing.
Communications is often a challenge when it comes to running operations that are under pressure. So it's no surprise that in TR1 communications has come out as one of the themes that needs work.
We're in day 2 of TR2,
which is really the last chance for technology, as well as our energy colleagues, to test readiness.
We were doing some really fun ones yesterday where we get to simulate cyber attacks, and we actually have people that are generating load against the systems, and all the alerts and monitors are flashing and going red, and they think they're under attack, and they're talking to the government about central cybersecurity. If you can deal with 6 important issues at the same time going on, when you get hit with one of them, you'll have a certain calmness to you, and you'll be able to we'll be able to work through it, no problem.
In most technology projects, success is judged in a very kind of scientific way. But in this case, we have such a monster of an operation to deliver, and pretty much all of the stuff that you need runs out. So the money runs out, the time runs out, you know, the space to operate diminishes. What you're left with at the end of the day, in terms of contingency, is the people.
The first key takeaway from me, from both technical rehearsals and the test events, is just what invaluable exercises they are in terms not only of seeing how ready you are, but actually getting yourself ready. These are the opportunities when you really get the teams to work together and actually get a little bit of an early flavour of some of the challenges that they might have to face come the games. But complacency is the enemy here. This is a marathon, not a sprint. But even in a marathon, you sprint those last few hundred yards. That's where we are now. And in the same way that the athletes have to pull out their best to get over the line, we need to do the same. And if we do, I'm confident we'll deliver an absolutely fantastic result.
We are producing output to a worldwide audience of 4 billion people. So we need to make sure that the technology is absolutely stable and secure and accurate, and the people supporting that technology are there to help.
So there you have it. What questions have you got? Stick your hand up, and Mike will come to you, I think.
One over here.
Thank you. Oh, let me start with an easy question. What was your favorite moments in sports for the games?
I've probably got two. Two that spring to mind. Probably the best bit of sport I saw was David Odisha's 800 metres world record on the track. That was in the second week. But probably the one that sticks in my mind more would be on the first Saturday. I happened to be down at Eton Dorney where we did the rowing. And at that point, the UK hadn't had all that many medals. But that was a day when things really changed in the stadium later on. But it started in the rowing. And I was there for just 3/4 an hour, really to check my team out, see how they were doing on that particular venue. And I was there, in that 3/4 an hour, I saw 2 British golds and 1 British silver got won, complete with the medal ceremonies and all the rest of that. It was a beautiful sunny day, and the crowds were yelling and shouting, and the atmosphere was fantastic. So I think that was the moment that I thought, oh, you know what, this is actually going quite well. So that's probably the point that sticks in my mind.
With the Brazil games coming up, in what phase of this whole project is the current organisation of the next Olympic Games?
Okay, so my last job, which was the same as Beijing's last job, was to go out to Rio and debrief the Rio team on technology. That happened in November last year. It was a week-long process. Me and a lot of people saw in the video there went out with me. And in fact, in the technical rehearsal, very important for me was actually one of the independent observers doing the technical rehearsal. So quite a lot of interchange between us and Rio. The stage they're at is kind of what you'd expect at the moment. They're in kind of planning, trying to help the contractor need and with whom. The challenges, of course, will be a little bit different from ours because Rio is a very different city in ever so many ways from London.
maybe you've jumped really hard.
Well, you face all the issues most CIOs would face throughout their career, but not all of us will be a CIO of the Olympics, but probably some of us will be a CIO in the future. Which challenges did you face, and would you consider current issues on the agenda of the CIO?
Normal CIO, as it were. Yeah. Well, I think, at the risk of stating the obvious, I think the big ones, well, it's always difficult to generalise because companies are in so many different sort of states and places. But the big ones for me right now would be around cloud. What does that mean? How fast should you take advantage of the cloud? That it's going to happen, I think, is inevitable. But it's a big question about how fast you should try and take services from the cloud rather than delivering your own private data centers. There's a whole issue about the consumerization of technology. Bring your own device. To what degree do you let your workforce, lock into your network with their alien devices that you don't have any security control over? I mean, that's big, I think, for a lot of CIOs. Big data, that's huge for an awful lot of businesses. The digitization of processes, again, big. So those would be the general, and I think you find a lot of businesses which are facing into those. I think the broader challenge I sense, certainly in the UK, I don't know how it is in Holland, there's a general problem with talent coming through. So in the UK, the numbers of British people reading computer science, for example, dropped right off 10 years ago. So the number of new graduates we've got with those qualifications has really gone down. And I know from talking to colleagues that one of the real challenges facing a lot of departments, one of those sort of big forces I talked about, the consumerisation and so on, is who's going to be the next generation of middle management? Where are these people coming from? So that's a bit of a general UK comment. I don't know how it is over here. And I think after that, it's very much specific to each organisation, particular challenges that an organisation has.
You were talking a lot about what you learned from the Beijing Olympics. What did you learn from the Vancouver Olympics?
Well, interesting. So Vancouver was February 2010, and I don't think we learnt anything very radical from Vancouver, partly because it's a winter games, not summer games, and the winter games are very much smaller than the summer games. So the sort of issues you have in the summer, it's on a different scale than the winter. But there were some specifics. There were some specifics around things like some of the stuff to do with engaging with NBC and the way they wanted to do some of their technical routing stuff. There was some stuff around, we trialled ODF in Vancouver. It was the first time any ODF had been piloted just for one sport, which was the biathlon. We got some learnings out of that. And probably the biggest thing we got from Vancouver was we recruited a load of their team to come and work in London, which gave us a load of experience. And the fourth thing was not so much a learning as a confirmation, which was Vancouver was the first games to try and do anything in the way of a results app download, and that they had one just for the iPhone, and they got 1 million downloads really quick. So that confirmed our view that by 2012 this was going to be this is going to be big. So those would be the main in Vancouver.
I've got another question. You had this very big diagram of the technology interfacing.
Yeah.
How did you develop all that technology? Can you tell us something about that process?
Yeah. So it was, first of all, it was all outsourced. Okay. We tried to develop very little in-house as a temporary organisation. So, and it was actually outsourced to a combination of my web supplier, people who did the central distribution software, which was Atos, and then Omega, or Swiss Timing, and all their subsidiaries. So we had about 10 companies involved in that in different ways. So it was being developed, the stuff was being developed in Turin, in Italy, in Spain, India, South Korea, Germany, France, a couple of other places. Okay. So the real challenge for us as an organising committee was getting the coordination and the governance in place so everyone was clear on what the requirements were, and particularly the interface definitions, which was a lot of which was revolved around that Olympic data feed that got referenced a couple of times, which was kind of a new standard implemented in London for the first time. So the IOC some time ago decided it would be a good idea to try and standardise sports results messaging on an XML schema and make it all standard. And then their idea is actually this becomes a standard not just for the Olympics but all sports, but we're not quite there yet. So really our main issue there was around how do you put the right governance and review process in to manage a series of outsourced developments that are going on in a whole variety of different countries on very different timelines and very different processes. That's fine, but the real key to success is what went on in the test lab. So your proof, actually, that any of this stuff is going to work is when you get it working in the lab. And that's where the rubber hits the road, to use an English expression. And it's really the process in the test lab whereby software would come in. Sometimes we would send it back, it's not good enough. Sometimes we're going to standard process about defects, generating defect lists and defect resolution processes, defect priorities. And we ran a process probably for the last year, up to the games. I was actually drove, which was every fortnight. We had all the suppliers on either a meeting or a conference call where we went through the defect status for every single piece of software until we got them all down to an acceptable level of defects, because you never get to zero with software development. Probably the crunch bar. I have a defect here, it seems. That was the crunch bar process was what went on in testing piece. Okay.
You already mentioned that there were quite some innovations and overall you were pretty successful, but were there any things you wish you could have done but it was just technical not possible yet perhaps?
There's lots. The problem with the Olympics is there's always more you can do and you've got limited funds, so I mean there are lots of things around, particularly virtual graphics on the television that we did quite a bit in London, but there's lots more opportunity, and also on the website. And it's partly a technical constraint, just in how much time have you got to do all these things, and it's partly to do with rights. So the way the IOC work with the broadcasters is the broadcasters have rights to any animated images, which makes it very hard because the sort of virtual graphic you might want to do on the website to make it really engaging is going to require animated images. So you find yourselves with some challenges in that way. But there are some things in that space that would have been good to do. What else? Yeah, that's probably the main one, actually, in that space.
So what would be the moment when you decide not to do such a thing? Would it be in 2010 already, or just a few weeks before the launch of the games?
Those sorts of things, 18 months out at least. I mean, there were some things we decided to do or not do very late on, but mostly that would be around deployment of extra PCs or infrastructure issues, deployment issues, not software development issues. Those all get decided well in advance. You try and lock down your entire architecture at minimum sort of 15 months out, and preferably well before that.
All right, thank you.
There was a question just in front of you, actually. Yeah.
We like to hear the juicy stories. What actually went wrong when you said, yes, that's a bit of a surprise, we didn't get that right?
Yes, so let me tell you that story, because actually there was something did go wrong, which was on day one, which was actually a good time for it to go wrong. And it's quite a good story because it brings together a few of the things I've mentioned. And it probably wouldn't have been a problem if it hadn't been for certain things going on in the social media world. So let me explain all this. So I mentioned the road race, and I mentioned the criticality of measuring, well, it's the criticality not for the result, but the criticality for the commentators of understanding the gap between the lead cyclist and the peloton, the pack. Okay? And the way this is done, okay, is motorbikes. You have one motorbike that is sitting in front of the lead and one motorbike that is sitting with the pack. Okay? And they're chucking back a data feed, okay, to base, just saying what the time is and where they are. Okay, fine. The way this is normally done is via GPRS, very low tech. Works pretty well. That's what happens in all kinds of events, Tour de France and all the rest of them, all fine. We were a little nervous in London because of the congestion of the 3G network and so on that I've already mentioned. So we had kind of specified a slightly richer solution which involved using several networks at the same time and also a radio link up to a plane. So quite a resilient solution. That's what we specified. Okay, hang on to that thought. The other thing you need to know for me to tell this story is the cycling road race that we actually ran during the test event and during the Olympics was not the cycling road race route that the UK had actually committed to during the bid. So during the bid, the cycling road race was supposed to go through East London and back again. Okay, but Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, said no way were we going to shut down all roads in London for yet another day during the games, because every time we shut these roads down in London, of course, just brought everything to a halt. So not during the week was Boris's edict. This would be happening in 2010, quite some time before the games. Okay, Manolo, who's the managing director for the Olympic Broadcast Services, said no way were they going to schedule the men's road race at the weekend. Okay, because the schedule was already chocker. Meanwhile, the UCI, the International Federation Responsible for Cycling, said, so in the bid it had to be in London, it better be in London. So, we had a little bit of a problem, which took some time to resolve, but where we got to eventually was a sort of compromise on all parts, which meant it did happen at the weekend. It started in London, but finished at a place called Box Hill, which is south of London, middle of nowhere. Middle of nowhere is important, because there was no infrastructure there. So, in fact, the men's road race went 9 times around Box Hill before it came back into London. This is all relevant and important to the story, because we'll get there, I know I'm making a big deal of it. But we did put some temporary infrastructure on Box Hill. So we put in a temporary radio mast, which was fine, and we put in a temporary mast for the 3G. But, kind of, not all that comfortable about it. Right, hold all that. Then there was a Tour de France a couple of weeks before the games, when fellow lad, Bradley Wiggins, won. Okay. Then the other thing you need to know is that men's road race was on day 1 of the Olympics, I've already mentioned Saturday, and one of the few things you can do as an organising committee is to try and make things work for your home country. You clearly can't affect the result, but you can try and organise the programme so you get some early goals. And the early goal that we thought we were going to get was Mark Cavendish in this men's road race. Right? So the press were basically telling the world that Mark Cavendish was going to win the gold here. Okay. So you've got Bradley Wiggins, Tour de France winner, Mark Cavendish, heroes of the home crowd, right? All in this race. So everybody piles out to Box Hill. Okay. We're not talking just a few hundred people. There were tens of thousands of people around Box